Richard Gasquet was once called the Mozart of tennis. At just 9 years old in February 1996, his face was on the cover of French Tennis magazine, hailed as the next great champion. He made his ATP debut in April 2002 at age 15 years and 10 months at the Monte Carlo Masters, becoming the youngest player ever to qualify for a Tennis Masters Series event. The setup was perfect. A child prodigy with a one-handed backhand so beautiful, even experts called it one of the best ever. But here's the context. France hadn't had a men's Grand Slam winner since Yannick Noah in 1983. The entire country pinned its hopes on Gasquet. He was expected to be a world number one, a multiple slam winner, maybe even a legend. The pressure was enormous, and the spotlight never let up from his teenage years. The specific example that defined his career came in 2007 at age 21. Gasquet reached the Wimbledon semifinals, taking out Andy Roddick in an epic 5-set quarterfinal thriller where he hit 93 winners. It looked like his moment had finally arrived, but he lost to Roger Federer in straight sets. He reached another Wimbledon semifinal in 2015 and a US Open semifinal in 2013, but never made a Grand Slam final. He retired in 2025 at age 38 with 16 ATP titles, a peak ranking of number 7 achieved in July 2007 and over 600 match wins. But never that elusive slam final. The impact? Gasquet became the symbol of unfulfilled potential in French tennis. He was always almost there, but never quite broke through when it mattered most. And speaking of prodigies who became global celebrities for reasons other than tennis, let's talk about Anna Kournikova. Anna Kournikova became the most famous tennis player who never won a singles tournament. She received her first tennis racket as a New Year gift in 1986 at age 5 and made her WTA debut in September 1995 at just 14 years old at the Moscow Ladies Open. Sports Illustrated put her on covers, and major sponsors signed her to massive deals. The hype was incredible. Everyone expected her to dominate the sport for years. Here's the context. Kournikova had everything going for her. She was incredibly talented, reaching the Wimbledon semifinals in 1997 at just 16 years old, becoming only the second woman in the Open era to reach Wimbledon semifinals in her debut there. She had powerful ground strokes, great movement, and looked like a superstar. Tennis desperately needed its next big female star, and Kournikova seemed like the perfect answer. The specific example that shows how things went wrong happened throughout her singles career. Kournikova reached her career-high ranking of number 8 in 2000 and made it to Grand Slam semifinals twice. She was right there on the verge of breaking through, but she never won a single WTA singles tournament, not one. Despite her talent and ranking, she couldn't convert in finals. Meanwhile, her off-court fame exploded. She became one of the most searched names on Google, appeared in magazines, and later dated Enrique Iglesias. The impact was bittersweet for her tennis legacy. She retired in 2003 at just 22 due to serious back and spinal problems, including a herniated disc. While she never won singles titles, she was incredibly successful in doubles, winning 2 Australian Opens with Martina Hingis and reaching world number 1 in doubles. But her story gets even more complex when you look at what happened to Yolena Doic. Yolena Doic shocked the tennis world at just 16 years old by beating the world number 1, Martina Hingis, 6-2, 6-0, in the first round of Wimbledon in 1999. She wasn't just talented, she was fearless, taking down top players like it was nothing. Everyone predicted she'd be a future Grand Slam champion and world number 1. The girl from Serbia seemed destined for greatness. But here's the dark context. Docic's father, Damir, was controlling every aspect of her life. He moved the family between countries, Serbia, then Australia, then back to Serbia, based on his political views and disputes with tennis federations. He was verbally abusive, physically threatening, and created chaos wherever they went. Yelena was trapped in an impossible situation, trying to focus on tennis while dealing with family trauma. The specific example that shows how bad things got happened around 2000-2001. Docic's father became increasingly erratic and controlling, making public outbursts and creating media controversies. Doic reached her career-high ranking of number 4 in August 2002, but by then the family dysfunction was taking its toll. Her father's behavior became so disruptive that it affected her ability to focus on tennis. She began disappearing from tournaments for extended periods, dealing with the psychological trauma of years of abuse and control. The impact was heartbreaking. Docic's ranking eventually plummeted as she struggled with depression and the aftermath of family abuse. She eventually escaped her father's control and made a comeback, but the damage was done. She never reached another Grand Slam semifinal after her early promise. Speaking of players whose families created problems, let's look at Mirjana LucicBaron. If you're loving this video, subscribe now and help us hit 5,000 tennis fans by month's end. Mirjana LucicBaron was supposed to be the next Monica Seles. At just 15 in 1997, she won her first WTA tournament in Bol, Croatia, and reached the Wimbledon semifinals the same year. She had power, precision, and the mental toughness to beat anyone. Tennis experts were calling her a future top 10 player, and she seemed unstoppable in the late 1990s. The context was terrifying. LucicBaron's father was physically and emotionally abusive, controlling her career and her life with an iron fist. He isolated her from friends, coaches, and anyone who might help her escape. The tennis world had no idea what was happening behind closed doors. They just saw a talented teenager who was winning matches and climbing to her peak ranking of number 20. The specific example that changed everything came after 1998. Following her early success, LucicBaron suddenly disappeared from professional tennis. She was just 16 years old and ranked in the top 50, but she vanished completely. Years later, she revealed the truth. She had fled her abusive father with nothing but the clothes on her back. She was homeless, working odd jobs, and couldn't afford to play tennis. The girl who was supposed to dominate women's tennis was sleeping on friends' couches and trying to survive. The impact was devastating, but ultimately inspiring. LucicBaron lost 7 years of her prime, returning to tennis only in her mid-20s. She made an incredible comeback, reaching the Australian Open semifinals in 2017 at age 34, nearly 20 years after her first major success. Her story became one of the greatest comebacks in tennis history. Now let's talk about a player whose attitude became his biggest enemy. Bernard Tomic burst onto the scene as the youngest player to win a main draw match at the Australian Open, doing it in 2009 at just 16 years old. 2 years later, in 2011, he became the youngest quarterfinalist at Wimbledon at age 18. He had everything: power, touch, court sense, and the kind of natural talent that made tennis look effortless. Australia thought they'd found their next great champion. Here's the context. Tomic's father, John, was incredibly demanding and controlling, similar to other tennis parents we've seen. But Bernard also developed a rebellious streak and a too-cool-for-school attitude that rubbed people the wrong way. He made comments about not loving tennis, about being in it for the money, and about not caring if he won or lost. The Australian media and tennis establishment turned against him. The specific example that defined his career happened in 2017. Tomic lost in the first round of Wimbledon to Mirjana Zverev in straight sets, and afterward admitted he was bored during the match and didn't really try. The tennis world exploded. He was heavily criticized by former champions and tennis officials, and his relationship with Tennis Australia deteriorated further. His ranking plummeted from his career high of number 17, achieved in January 2016, to outside the top 200. The impact was devastating for his career. Tomic became a cautionary tale about wasted talent and poor attitudes. He continues playing mainly on lower-tier tours, making headlines more for controversies than tennis achievements. Speaking of players who struggled with motivation, let's look at Nicole Vaidisova. Nicole Vaidisova was the teenage sensation who took women's tennis by storm in 2006. At just 17, she reached the semifinals of both the Australian Open and French Open in the same year. She had a powerful game, stood nearly 6 feet tall, and seemed destined to be the next dominant force in women's tennis. Everyone expected her to win multiple Grand Slams. The context was intense pressure and burnout. Vaidisova had been playing professional tennis since she was 14, traveling the world and dealing with adult responsibilities while still a teenager. The constant pressure to perform, combined with the physical demands of the tour, started taking its toll. She reached her career-high ranking of number 7 in May 2007, but was making millions of dollars while losing her love for the game. The specific example that shocked everyone came in July 2010. Vaidisova, still only 20 years old and having been ranked in the top 10, suddenly announced her retirement from professional tennis. She said she had lost her passion for the game and wanted to live a normal life. The tennis world couldn't believe it. Here was a player in her prime with years of potential success ahead of her, just walking away. The impact was immediate and lasting. Vaidisova tried to make a comeback a few years later, but she never recaptured her early success. She became a symbol of how the pressure of professional tennis can burn out even the most talented players. But sometimes the problem isn't burnout, it's inconsistency, like we saw with Ernests Gulbas. Ernests Gulbas had one of the most explosive games in tennis. When he was on, he could beat anyone, and he proved it by reaching the French Open semifinals in 2014, defeating players like Tomas Berdych and Jo-Wilfried Tsonga along the way. He had a massive serve, crushing ground strokes, and the kind of natural talent that made coaches drool. Latvia had never had a tennis star like this. Here's the context. Gulbas came from a wealthy family and never seemed to take tennis as seriously as he should have. He was more interested in philosophy, partying, and living life than grinding on the practice court. He would show up to tournaments unprepared, play brilliantly for a week, then disappear for months, and his inconsistency was legendary. He could beat the world number 1 one day and lose to a player ranked outside the top 200 the next. The specific example that perfectly captures Gulbas happened after his 2014 breakthrough, following his incredible French Open run, where he reached his career-high ranking of number 10 on June 2nd, 2014. He completely fell apart. He lost in the first round of Wimbledon just weeks later to David Goffin, then went months without winning consecutive matches. His ranking dropped dramatically in the following years, a stunning fall from grace. The impact was a career of what-ifs. Gulbas finished with just 6 ATP titles and never reached another Grand Slam semifinal. He became the poster child for wasted talent and lack of dedication. But at least Gulbas had some success. Our next player never even won a professional title. Donald Young was supposed to save American men's tennis. He was the world's top-ranked junior player, winning the Australian Open and Wimbledon junior titles in 2005. The USTA invested heavily in his development, and tennis fans were convinced he'd be the next great American champion. At 18, he was already being compared to Andre Agassi and Andy Roddick. The context was enormous pressure and unrealistic expectations. American men's tennis was struggling. With no clear successor to Agassi and Roddick, Young was thrust into the spotlight as the savior, with media attention and sponsorship deals before he'd proven himself at the professional level. Every match became a referendum on his potential and American tennis's future. The specific example that defined Young's struggles came throughout his early professional career. He received wildcards into major tournaments and was expected to make deep runs. Instead, he consistently lost early rounds to lower-ranked players. The crowd would turn on him, the media criticized his game, and the pressure became overwhelming. This pattern repeated for years. High expectations followed by disappointing results. The impact was a career of near misses and unfulfilled potential. Young never won an ATP title, despite reaching several finals. His highest ranking was number 9 in August 2011, far below the top 10 predictions. He became a cautionary tale about the dangers of overhyping junior success, speaking of players who couldn't handle the transition to professional tennis. Let's look at Philippe Pelo. Philippe Pelo dominated junior tennis like few players ever have. In 2012, he won both Wimbledon and the US Open junior titles, becoming just the 5th player in history to win multiple junior Grand Slams in the same year. Canada thought they'd found their next tennis superstar, and the tennis world was watching to see how this incredible junior talent would translate to the professional level. Here's the context. Pelo had everything going for him: powerful ground strokes, great court coverage, and the mental toughness to win big matches. Tennis Canada invested heavily in his development, providing him with top coaches and training facilities. The expectations were sky high, with many predicting he'd be in the top 10 within a few years of turning professional. The specific example that shows how things went wrong came in his early professional years. Despite his junior success, Pelo struggled to win matches at even the lowest levels of professional tennis. He spent years grinding on the Futures circuit, the bottom rung of professional tennis, unable to break through to the main ATP Tour. His powerful game that dominated juniors seemed to fall apart against older, more experienced professionals. The impact was devastating for Canadian tennis hopes. Pelo's career-high ranking was just number 161 in June 2015, and he never won a single ATP main draw match. He became another example of how junior success doesn't guarantee professional achievement. The transition from junior to professional tennis destroyed another promising career. But sometimes the problem isn't the transition, it's injuries, like what happened to Laura Robson. Laura Robson was Britain's golden girl of tennis. She won the Wimbledon junior title in 2008, became the first British woman to reach a WTA final in 23 years, and won Olympic silver in mixed doubles alongside Andy Murray in 2012. At just 18, she reached her career-high ranking of number 7 in July 2013 and seemed destined to become Britain's first Grand Slam champion since Virginia Wade in 1907. The context was perfect timing for British tennis. With Andy Murray rising to the top of men's tennis, Robson was supposed to be his female counterpart. The British media loved her story. A left-handed power player with a big serve and fearless attitude. Sponsorship deals poured in, and she became the face of women's tennis in the UK. The specific example that changed everything started in late 2013. Robson began experiencing wrist problems that required surgery. What should have been a minor setback turned into a nightmare. The wrist never healed properly, requiring multiple surgeries over several years. She tried comeback after comeback, but the pain was too severe. Her ranking plummeted from the top 30 to outside the top 500. The impact was heartbreaking. Robson was forced to retire from professional tennis in May 2018 at just 24 years old, her career destroyed by injuries. She went from being Britain's next tennis star to a cautionary tale about how quickly injuries can end a promising career. But at least Robson's problems were physical. Our final player's issues were all mental. Ryan Harrison was the American tennis prodigy who had everything except the ability to win when it mattered most. He reached the fourth round of the US Open as a teenager, had wins over top 10 players, and possessed one of the most complete games of his generation. The USTA believed he would be America's next Grand Slam champion. Here's what you need to know. Harrison had incredible natural talent, a powerful serve, aggressive ground strokes, and the physical tools to compete with anyone. He was mentally tough in practice and smaller tournaments, but something changed when the stakes got higher. The pressure of being labeled the future of American tennis seemed to weigh on him heavily. The specific example that defined Harrison's career came in the big moments he couldn't convert. He reached multiple ATP finals but kept losing them in heartbreaking fashion. He'd build big leads, then find ways to lose. Against top players, he'd play incredible tennis for 2 sets, then completely fall apart in the third. The pattern became so predictable that fans started expecting him to struggle in crucial moments. The impact was a career of almost and what-ifs. Harrison's highest ranking was number 40 in October 2017, and while he did eventually win some ATP titles later in his career, it took much longer than expected. He became known more for his near misses than his victories in his early years. American tennis fans watched another promising player struggle to reach his potential. And we arrived at the end of this video. If you've loved it, please subscribe and watch our next video here.